Welcome tonight to our continuing lecture series of representing modernism, and continuing also with the intersection of that phenomena via the Dutch architects and those participating in the 9+1 show. And we have what now is our third presentation by an office in the 9+1 show, and that is Knox, represented solely through Lars Spuybrook, who I think comes to us probably with a degree of difference, shall I say, than all of the others in the exhibition. If anyone can claim one out of the 9+1, I think he surely has a bit more of a claim to that because of particular sorts of obvious differences. Knox is located in Rotterdam. Lars did study in Delft, the technical university, in the 80s, at a similar time period as a number of the other architects because of the similarity of age of the 9+1 show, but was not actually engaged in discussions there with many of them because of his long-standing interest in, I think, ideas which are supporting the work that you'll see tonight and have seen a bit in the panels out there in the lobby. Of course, his most well-known work is the saltwater pavilion in Zeeland, which is on an island sort of in the south end of the Randstad, basically, and below that in Holland. And he rightly points out that architecture in Holland, and I think as everybody now who's sort of looked at this work and been engaged in a number of the other lectures understand that the sort of issue of housing, which 1 million houses by the year 2010, et cetera, statistical conditions, levels of density, field operations, strategies and diagrams which come well before and finally sustain the ideas of projects in the face of Knox's and Lars' ideas of not so much rejecting that project, as it were, but working within another condition which obviously treats form as a particularly different sort of cultural project, as it were, not specifically one about the field or the phenomena of the social, but one which talks about spatiality, probably much more familiar at some level to us in North America. Therefore, I think this sort of intersection between the liquid and the animate and the biological with the sort of mechanical or the technical is a suggestion that this is work which is attempting to sort of make a kind of third architecture, one which mutates completely into the possibility of the overturning of a kind of Cartesian paradigm, where most of the architects in 9+1 talk about new conditions. And I was very, very keen to hear the term new, both while I was in Holland and even during discussions here in LA. Architects constantly using the word new conditions, but in terms of urbanism and statistics, primarily about phenomena of the social, whereas I think Lars certainly will talk about new conditions relative to sort of melted or vague paradigms or sort of evanescent paradigms, landscapes of a sort of continuous phenomena which cannot be statistically charted out so precisely to be formed by these sorts of Cartesian datascapes. I think that there's a kind of clear difference there, and I think that it would be very instructional and very purposeful for him to make this lecture for us so that we can kind of contrast his project relative to other Dutch propositions. So please help me in welcoming Lars Spuybrook.
Thank you very much, Neil, for the introduction. I must warn you, I look a bit like a zombie. It's not only because of my jet lag, but it's also because coming from Europe, it was almost winter, and I came here and it's high summer, so I put out my jacket and everything, and suddenly I'm with a cold. So another warning is that the lecture starts out a bit bizarre with a murder. This whole text is like 4,500 words, so that's 45 minutes, I think. And afterwards you will have a chance to ask questions, and I hope you will. That will make it longer. Let us imagine a knife, a blade, the handle, nothing to it, just a knife. It's purposeful, that is the act. The act of use is printed within the matter of the handle and extends the hand, and it changes it to the sharpened metal of the blade. Okay. This is the normal instrumentalist passive way of looking at a technical device. Here am I with my sovereign will over the object, and there is the world waiting to be cut. The instrument, therefore, is placed in between, passively waiting and servile, neither changing nor transforming either the body or the environment. Now, imagine another different everyday situation. A hand carried by the speed of the knife plunges into the chest. I'm trying to be poetic, and it kills. Terrible, shocking, but anyway, very interesting. Because I would like to ask myself, where was the knife? Where was the knife before it was picked up by the hand in effect? Or to quote Borges, what is a knife in a drawer other than a sleeping knife, awakened when taken up? Where is the knife? Or better, where is the knife when I, supposing I would be the murderer, think of it? Is it only in the drawer waiting to be picked up? Where is the event? Where is the middle, the mediated? Where is the initiative? Just imagine how this way of handling knife starts out as something passive and purely utilitarian. Then the knife, by numerous times it is used, slowly grows into the body, makes a print of its acting into the soft matter of the body, a small network of related movements of muscles, a motor print. Yes, now the knife, spelled between brackets, has taken place within the body. This is the virtual knife, the phantom knife, as I would call it. The knife form is actualized in the event where the hand, handle, and chest meet. So instead of a passive, cool, instrumentalist way of looking at machines and technology, I have an active, interactive, hot, and animist way of looking at it. No machine ever just has one function, no matter how much engineers have tried to tie them up within their mechanistic views. They are always unstable and ambiguous. Normally, machines and media are favored for their servile abilities, but next to that, they are always a source of instability, something that can be misused or experimented with, something that destabilizes action, that accelerates action, something that grows through our actions into the matter of the body memory. The machine, the machinic, is in its essence this contagious behavior of machines and tools. We don't use machines, we fuse with them. Everybody who has once tried to put a nail into the wall knows this. For when one tries to put a hammer consciously onto the head of the nail, the person will hit his own thumb. Only when one does not interfere between the hammer and the nail, it will move into the wall easily. We have to let the hammer put in the nail. You have to let your hand be carried by the vector of the hammer. Just like surfing the waves of the sea, there's already action within the form, which is expressly not passive. And our hand just picks up this vector and brings it to its end. So to end this small essay, I would conclusively state there is no action but only interaction. Every initiative lies exactly in between subject and object, body and machine. Sorry, I need some water. In architecture, we are used to technology only in the instrumentalist way. Siegfried Gideon wrote his mechanization takes command on the issue, on technology as the perfect butler, as service. This is called comfort. Nowadays, we find ourselves entangled in the ever-disappearing distinction between body and surface, soft contact lenses, power steering, waterbeds, intuitive interfacing, teleshopping, TTTs, things that think, ubiquitous computing, whatever. A definitive shift from mechanization to automation. We expand ourselves into a host of technical processes that match our physique so perfectly that we can no longer even feel them. Comfort is the technique of softening things up until the distinction between body and machine disappears. It is a lubricant that in the long run makes it possible for us to slide through the world without any resistance, a technical anesthetic, which is not for making things easier, but at the end for replacing reality itself. For instance, think of Bill Gates' house, his eagle's nest, which by some people has mistakenly called a virtual house, where every human act, to put it mildly, is replaced by home automation, by his smart house in Heimatstil. He phones his bath and he orders the temperature of the water. The blinds close themselves when the sun gets too strong. Everything done by remote control, living your house as a pilot. From the Corbusian machine à habiter towards Bill Gates' living simulator, where the only thing virtual is he himself. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you the body of Walter Hudson, Mr. Posthuman, even more posthuman than Michael Jackson, who ran his company by remote control, and while his actions became more and more replaced and automated, his flesh took revenge. As the disembodying of his actions grew, the matter of the flesh grew exponentially, without any resistance of the outside world. This man who, while he turned in his sleep, the skeleton rotated all right, but the flesh stayed behind. This man who had become his own bed, his own jacuzzi, was sacrificed by a home automation system for the sake of comfort. He died a few years ago and had to be cut into pieces, enabling his family to transport him like an electronic Osiris into parts to his final resting place. Now you can imagine I am incredibly positive about technology, but for all the wrong reasons. Not that it enlightens us, or that it liberates us, as neo-Gnostics like Timothy Leary would like to make us think, or that it makes our life more easy. Thank God that is not the case. The history of technology, let's say from the Renaissance onwards, the history of media is a history of acceleration and increasing vectorization, of blurring the architectural and tectonic divisions. Because where architecture has sought to make divisions, that is space, keeping things apart, between here and there, private and public, left and right, up and down, center and periphery, wall and floor, figure and ground, media has sought to blur and to blend, continuously trying to connect and mix up. Alas, as it would take too much of our time to check out the whole development of media, the breaking down of Renaissance perspective with the coming of the train and how its speed changed our concept of space, only to think of James Joyce and Cubism. Or think of the car after that, rising to its peak here in Los Angeles with its synthetic historic city centers, vacuum sealed in shopping malls, floating in never-ending asphalt lakes, or in Las Vegas where the facade was steamed off from the interior, being split up into the billboard and the dirty realism of the gambling hall, where the parking lot in between. Let's not forget Rome was built on the ground, black private figures on white public ground. But Las Vegas is built on 30 miles per hour, on a fundament of speed. Where walking around, one cannot really understand Las Vegas, or Los Angeles for that matter. To go on with the history of technology, of speed, the third shock wave is that of television. Obviously, the realm of the polis, as the primary organizer of socio-political life, has shifted to electronic media. Think of how Ceausescu fell down, or how the Berlin Wall fell down, or the Gulf War was fought. All events potentialized, charged, and even ignited by the presence of television. Then the fourth wave would be the internet, and I'll leave it with that. To leave this historical paragraph and to go on with drawing conclusions for architecture. Architecture as a medium, that means a triple shift. One, the shift from space situation towards a field condition. Secondly, from object to process, or as Paul Virilio would put it, from objet à trajet, or substance à l'accidence, from substance to accident. Thirdly, in architecture we'll move from Euclidean geometry to topology. Together, these three mental ruptures make up for the emergence of liquid architecture, which was termed by Marcus Novak, and by him only reserved for the digital version, but for me it should be applied to the whole range of the architectural. The shift from space to field is that essential because the liquid in itself is a medium. It operates in forces that pass through the matter of the liquid as waves. This is opposite to the thinking in empty space occupied by solid objects. Everything is connected, nothing is isolated, from a top-down hierarchical system of space towards a bottom-up network of interfering waves within the three-dimensional field. Secondly, this results in a different way of conceiving architectural form. More in time than in space, more as an emergent property than as a solid object resisting time. So next to smooth space, we should also think of soft systems, as Sanford Quinter termed them. Of self-organizing form, form made up of deformation, form being coherent because it isn't hard, but just because it's flexible, adaptable, and changeable. Earlier, we architects were obsessed with cubes and spheres. Now we have become obsessed with clouds, with swarms and flocks, with a traffic jam, with the behavior of a dog, with the substance and surface of water. Complex forms created in time. In all these examples, we see form and action as one. We see form and movement in one objectile. So, we also move from a geometry of static fixed point towards a geometry of the flexible, of the bendable, of vectors and continuous surfaces. That is, topology, the network of curves. From the tectonics and elementarism of Koolhaas towards an atectonic liquid in active architecture. Now finally we'll move into design and building of architecture. I'll discuss three projects which essentially are made up of tubes, hollow trajectories that form corridors, a strange breed of corridors, complex corridors. First is the Water Pavillion, which I hope I don't really have to introduce anymore, which was built last year for the Ministry of Water Management. Second, a small building called Blowout that only contains toilets. And third, a 140 meters high skyscraper, which will probably never be built. Can you start the video, please, Keith? I'll try to continue my theoretical pace on the body topology and architecture as a medium while discussing these projects. Sorry about that. First, we'll start the video of the Water Pavillion in action. I'd like to show you the geometry and the construction of the building on the slide. As you cannot see, one part and not one curve is the same. Not one element tries to stand out or to become different. No, in fact, everything tries to connect, to hand over the geometry, the flexible topology of splines, of a network of curves. Splines are something completely different than the Euclidean lines and points structure. A line stops at a point, then another line comes in. So normally architects work with the circle or line segments, all different and connected via points. This is the essence of tectonics. You have one element, then another. The discontinuity is not only in the construction, but it's already in the geometry. Now, with topology, the curved line is not made of circle segments, but is in fact a formula moving through different points, which are called control points. So line and point are not really separated. In fact, one could not just speak of lines and points because they exist within one continuum, within one dimension. We are not talking about polygons or meshes. The Water Pavillion is a network of splines, a patch. That is, it has internal coherence, but at the same time it is soft. When a force is exerted on different zones of the network, its reactions are not local, but are processed through the whole of the network, like rubber lines. Okay, this is a spline generator of John Fraser. Like rubber lines. In fact, this is a characteristic property of soft matter, of polymers, of rubber, of Arabic gum, noodles, bubbles, or foam. A flexible topology where form and deformation are one within a springy patch that makes all different forces interact with each other. The geometry is never at rest. There's always force on the lines. There's always action on the line. No points, only vectors handling the splines, bending them, stretching, twisting, handling over the action towards other parts. I would now, instead of discussing the whole building, like to show you a certain spot in the building where one can observe what this continuous tension in the geometry means. Now I'm going to show you this point. On the slide you can see the floor on the right splitting slowly, one part going down, that's on the left, the other part going up. This I could have done with a classical Corbusian ramp. Then 25 meters further on, this slope moves towards you again. I'm sure Koolhaas would have put a wall in between these two ramps. Okay, let's study this spot. There are two slopes, but they are connected with another slope. In fact, one can't speak of different slopes. It's one continuous surface, folding and bending, steep slopes and lesser steep slopes. Now imagine what happens. One walks on this slope, and the vector in the geometry is like a skateboard under your feet, or like the surfer always quoted from Gilles Deleuze. Your body is handling the inflection of the curve. One can walk straight on this route, one can walk back, or one can suddenly climb up the steeper part. I have seen 60-year-old people doing this. Because of the liquid architecture, the topology of curves, the body is moved and animated. Action is in the form, so the action is also in the body. Normally, with functionalist architecture, the form is only interested in this extremely low resolution of human behavior. A mechanistic view of a Parkinsonian body. It is only interested in the end, in the purpose of a human act. With this architecture, however, it is exactly the other way around. It is mostly interested in the start of the action, the point where the vector starts, where the human act picks up the wave of the springy geometry of the architecture. Here you can fall, stumble, run, be bored, lie down. In the geometry is charging and electrifying the body. Not in the Wagnerian way, not by giving it a purpose, but by passing the virtual movement in the architecture over to the body. It is animation, it is dance. It wants to make everyday movement into a fluent stream of life. It's not frozen music, it is silent music. This architecture is not interested in language, in meaning, in typology. It is interested in the body, in this almost subcortexian complexity of nerves, in the topology of the neural network. It is interested in the motor system, in the haptic and in proprioception. Because the Water Pavillion doesn't have a window, so without the tectonics of the wall, floor and ceiling, you don't have any other means to stand upright but to rely on your body's self-perception, its networking of muscle tone. No horizon, no horizontality, only the haptic body, without organs, without proportion. The body swarm, the body flock. With different actions are processed through the body at the same time. Always awake. The body sleeps, but your nerves never do. Every act within this building is charged with this instability, which is essential for the body to become active, to overcome one's instability, to gain form and shape, by constant feedback and processing of muscular information. Instead of a window, this building has a well. A vertical window to the middle of the earth, constructing a vertical horizon, the axis of vertigo, where falling and walking are merged. In the software program 3D Max, in the chapter on animation, it says, walking and running are special cases of falling. So in liquid architecture, I would like to propose another way of thinking surface geometry and action. Not a Koolhaas-Eisenman opposition of folded floors and folded volumes, where the first packs it in a rectangular volume and the American sexes object events with eventless programmatic planning by horizontal floors. In between these two, we have to rethink the work of Frederick Kiesler. We have to think the endless, the unending, the continuous, the three-dimensional, the atectonic, the smooth, and the curved. So we should also merge floor and wall, or feet and eyes, program and aesthetics, roots in the ground and roots in the sky, called aerials. Liquid architecture is not just the geometry of the liquid, it's also the liquid program, where actions are connected and become a stream of actions. Other architectures seek to freeze and control behavior. We have here liquidized, animated, and unleashed human behavior. Not by simulating the body, but by charging it. Not just by an anti-Cartesian view on geometry, but moreover an anti-Cartesian view on the body. As you can see on the tape behind me, this is strengthened by the interactive electronics at the different water systems in the building. This interactive installation consists of a complex system of 3 different kinds of sensors that create real-time calculated liquid algorithms for waves, ripples, and a blob. And apart from that, also operates on the big spine curving through the space, creating complex blue waves of light. And thirdly, also operates on the sound system, which you cannot hear now because the sound is down. If you don't mind, I'd like to skip the detailed information. But if you would like to know more, please ask afterwards. Can you now stop the tape, please? I will now pass on to my second building, much smaller and close to the Water Pavillion, a toilet block. Just to show interactive electronics is not essential in charging the body. I remember when discussing the work of Frederick Kiesler, a Dutch writer said to me that everybody seemed to focus on Kiesler's organic atectonic forms as something sculptural, while for him this architecture was for Kiesler only a way of restoring the relation of the human body towards the furniture, the piles of papers, the smells, the other people, the cat, etc. Architecture stepping aside by leaving out the framing of events by perspective and tectonics, to have a direct, unfiltered and intimate connection with smells, bodies and images. Architecture not framing furniture, but becoming furniture, that is, movable, flexible, made up of moving points, vectors. The unframing of architecture. This is for me a beautiful notion of what liquid architecture could be. Something I've used in the toilet block called Blowout. As you can see, it has a progressive geometry. Just like the Water Pavillion, it changes from one end to the other, but much more radical, because it tries to split up. At one end, to the right, it is round, not a circle, but round. Then it inflects. The trajectories containing the different sections split up. One dives into the earth, the other jumps into the air. It is a dune that splits into sand and wind, ground and sky. Now, by decree of the client, the same one as the water pavilion, we had to make a horizontal floor. This he said with a smile on his face. Programmatically, it is very simple. 4 men on the right, 2 standing up, 2 sitting down, and 4 women on the left. And a disabled person, of course very sexless, in the middle, trying to keep men and women apart. You enter via the middle. Let us now consider what really happens. A visitor has just left the water pavilion. And as you can imagine, he or she just has to go. The pressure within the body has been built up for hours, and now they almost explode. They are on this vector of almost involuntary behavior. More mechanistic, one can hardly get in architecture, the toilet. Strongly driven, one enters this small building, and what happens? One steps on this other vector, the vector of the wind, moving through the interior at high speed. Because this splitting geometry I spoke about just now is real. The structure is opened up on both sides. We have the grill on the right side and the exhaustion pipe on the left. So with the strong vector of the wind, one has to balance one's act while going to the toilet. The building establishes a dynamic equilibrium between internal pressure and huge external forces. Not only the wind, but also the distorted corridor, in which one can hardly move when it is crowded because the doors to the toilets are so wide. And these external forces are not just another natural element in architecture. They are media. It is furniture. It is a mobility, a vector carrying other acts of other people. As in the water pavilion, where human behavior interact with each other, carried by the geometry and the electronic interactive installation, here the vector of the wind carries the smell of others, their noises, their interiors. This liquid machine connects one interior with another. It shapes intimacy, it builds it up and lets it go. Finally, sitting on the toilet, orthogonal to the direction of the geometry, one can relieve oneself and relax. Now I would like to elaborate a bit on my idea of movement. It occurred to me a few months ago that I do corridors. Not only my architectural projects, but also my electronic artworks like SoftSide. They all consist of trajectories creating complex curves, or even a bundle of complex trajectories creating complex surfaces. But anyway, hollow buildings, corridors. Now, generally, the corridor is associated with one of the first steps of architecture into the machine age, a special case to go from A to B, without passing anything else. Instrumental, utilitarian, mechanistic, tayloristic, a pipe to move from A to B. Secondly, I would like to indicate that the curvature, as you might have noted, that the curvilinearity of the architecture is not of an ergonomic nature, not to smoothen the passage from A to B, but more to distract, to charge and to multiply, yes, to multiply one's direction. So as labyrinths are made of corridors, I would like to say that I also do labyrinths. And a labyrinth consists of a movement from A to A. As the specialist Borges always said in the desert, or in any other labyrinth, the center is always everywhere and the circumference nowhere. Every step is exactly equal to the other, no space in between them, like Zeno's arrow, and then you're lost. Okay, my structures, you don't get lost. I am, after all, an architect. But the movement is complex, it's folded, it's vague, undetermined. It's like the Paul Klee diagram of the imaginary Hauptlinie created by a multiple Kurvenlinie. A braid of curves intertwining. No living creature ever moves in a straight line. The roads may be straight, but our path is always curved. Motion is made up of curves. We propel ourselves, we throw ourselves forward. This is the vector. Then, on the way, we have to adjust, change our way, come back to it in a constant feedback. We make movement from movement. Within a move, we change our move and direction. Our ways are multiplied. Now I'll briefly show the third project, a design for a beach and a beach hotel on the Dutch coast. It is called Beachness and was commissioned by the Dutch Design Institute. We thought of the beach and the event of beachness not as architecture, but as furniture, thinking of Bernard Cashier's Terre Meuble. The earth as furniture, as something mobile. Beachness is created of soft matter, that is, because of its softness it is interactive. It provokes action and responds to action. On the beach everything is soft and moving. The bodies, the cars, surfboards, the fabric, lots of textile. The basic materials, kites, tent, flags, and of course the sand. Really intelligent material. For when it is wet one can use it as a highway, and when it is dry one can use it as a bed. The constant acceleration of the beach is directly linked to the spaceless flexibility of furniture. This project was completely computer generated with animation software. And I now can, alas, only show the design for the hotel and leave out the boulevard and beach, which we wanted to make of asphalt, to have cars moving like furniture too, slowly and carefully, moving through other people lying down or eating. Cars stopping, opening their doors, putting on the music, not acting as parked cars at all. The design of the tower was conceptualized and animated as a plume of smoke, as a vortex of small particles or bubbles that spiral upwards to bring about the feeling of floating in anti-gravity, but also to have the particles literally ride down the construction, as you can see here. That's the construction. Other than the water pavilion, where movement is created by merging walking and falling, we have here tried to merge walking and floating, or even levitating. Earlier, the working title for the project was Near Death Hotel. The concept is based on both the float tank and the critique on the standard Hotel Bellevue. Generally, boulevards are packed with these enormous structures staring at the horizon with their empty balconies, like maybe von Aschenbach in Death in Venice, trying to be cured from some awful lung disease. Truly 19th century therapeutic thinking. Instead of staring at the horizon, we took up the horizon and wrapped it in. We wrapped up the landscape around a vertical horizon. So it is a hotel without a view onto the sea. It is based on the idea that inside one actually is on the horizon. Great for people with jet lags. This is at the same time the idea of the float tank. Pure anti-gravity, a womb-like experience created by floating in very salty water without any orientation to the outside, only diffused white light. It is the modern experience of polar inertia, of being nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The 140-meter high structure should be a tourist attraction. It is not only 5 times as high as the Tower of Pisa, it is leaning twice as much. And moreover, it's also like a permanent crystal, because we wrap the curved steel construction in translucent fabric. Not transparent, but translucent. This skin, this extremely complex surface, is used for projecting images in 2 ways, from the outside on and from the inside out. One can project movies onto the skin and watch them at night from the beach, or record the faces and sounds of the people trapped inside, caught in their hyper-experience. But also we can show a sunset projected from the inside out. At 6 o'clock in the evening, when the sun sets over this Dutch beach resort, we shall start the projection of a live image at the bottom of the tower. Then it grows dark, this orange spot moves upwards. You can see it from miles away, because the camera filming the sunset travels with it. Every time zone will have its own webcam recording and transmitting its own sunset. So at midnight, at a height of some 90 meters, we will see the sun setting over New York City. Thank you very much. Does somebody have a question? Sorry, I didn't hear. It's a private-public partnership. It's on an island that has been used to create big dams in the season. And half of the... Could you speak into the microphone? Yes. Half of the client is a private foundation that has taken care of the island, and the other part is the Ministry of Water Management. And a few years ago they merged into this foundation trying to take care of the island in a more sensible way. Yeah, okay. I can't hear you. You wonder where I stop when I stop it. Well, I try to explain that in fact it doesn't stop. Because this is a notion you hear often when you're working in time to create form. It is not really that you stop a process and then make a sort of 3D photograph of it and then call it a building. Like the tower, you could see it includes more time frames or more photographs at the same time. But it's also, as I try to explain, because the vector is made of the geometry is made of vectors, that you cannot really speak of stopping. Because when you speak of stopping the animation, you are only looking at the form. And I'm trying to bring over the concept that geometry and body, and in this case the geometry of vectors and the moving body are in fact one. Because the perception of the geometry makes you animated. It's not only the animated form, because we cannot really make animated form, but you can make a geometry that animates the body. So I would say that in this kind of form, we do not freeze human behavior, like sleeping or living or walking a corridor or cooking in a kitchen, but that you try to connect different events within an architecture and a geometry that tries to make people move. It's not like fitness, but it's a sort of a spring or a skateboard on your feet. So I wouldn't speak of stopping. Yes? Yes. No, I would hate to think of a building moving, but maybe sometimes a little bit. I wouldn't think of a walking city like Ron Heron did 30 years ago, but as you could see, I use technology to not make mechanically architecture move, but to make electronically the environment change. And that's something different, because when you use electronics in a different way than smart technology or intelligent houses, then you can really make an environment that has develops its own behavior in interaction with the people who live in it. So you can imagine that that an architecture that has relationships with the electronics inside, like the Water Pavillion or the beach hotel, could change over years, or become or be trapped in a certain pattern, or go silent, or that you can imagine that they develop a kind of behavior that always interacts with people in the building. You mean the building will die and go to heaven, or that it will reach its electronic state? But why separate the technology of electronics from the technology that we use to build buildings? What I'm interested in is that the real experience of being somewhere is charged or electrified with electronics or geometry. And I see those at one level, so I don't see that the building comes first and then the electronics is stacked upon it and makes it move further. I see these two intertwining. I cannot imagine an electronic system working on its own. I mean, I can imagine it, but I'm not interested in it. Because I'm interested in dealing with form and how it charges the body and how I can use interactive electronics to charge that or to bring that further. Yes, I think that's crucial. Was that a question? No, why should we be afraid? It's a question of experience and trying to think something up and then developing it. It's like in architecture. More questions? No. the technology of building and the technology of designing are closely related, because while designing, you generate geometry. And while you generate geometry, you also generate a way of looking at the object itself. So it's not surprising that, for instance, with the toilet block, that the sections are there, and the connections between the curved sections are ruled surfaces, because it's in fact a sort of printout of an AutoCAD ruled surface. So I think the generating of the geometry in the machine always gives you a certain hint in how to build it. When you look at it rightly, you cannot build it in a different way. So in fact, you're building it already. The Water Pavillion, the strange thing about the Water Pavillion is that we were building it constantly three-dimensionally, and that contractor constantly wanted two-dimensional drawings. And that was really the difficult part about the whole process, because we had already built the model and the construction, and he wanted all these different parts left out and put on a piece of paper with all the measurements. And that was, let's say, 70% of all the work. So when a contractor would be able to read the three-dimensional information much more quickly or in a different way, then that would be much of a help. Okay, thank you.